Is tithing scriptural? It was scriptural under the Old Testament, but there's not a single verse in the New Testament that commands us to tithe. In Matthew 23, Jesus told the Pharisees, you tithe mint and dill and anise and cumin, you should do that. But he didn't tell his disciples that. He told his disciples in Luke 6, you must learn to give, not tithe, but give. And in the measure in which you give, God will give to you. So the New Testament commandment for disciples is not nothing, but giving replaces tithing. And it's important how we give. That means Jesus said, when you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That means give it secretly. And 2 Corinthians 9:7 says, give cheerfully. In other words, not how much you give, which is Old Covenant, but how you give, which is New Covenant. So God's not seeing whether you calculated 10% exactly and gave it. And some people say, well, if you preach like that, nobody will give anything. That's right. Some people are such misers, which probably proves they're not even converted, and they won't give anything. Well, God's not a beggar, and He's not going to squeeze them to get money out of them. God's got enough grateful children to support His work. He doesn't need to squeeze the accounts of misers to get money for His work. God's work will go on wonderfully, even if all the misers among His children keep the money to themselves. The question is, why do we give? You know, when I got converted, I'll tell you one thing, I've been a believer 54 years, I've never paid my tithe till today. I've never believed in it. When I was single and I had plenty of money, I'd give 50% of my income to God's work. I didn't believe in tithing. Nobody, I don't know what people believed. And my giving was out of gratitude. I was grateful for Jesus having given His life for me. And I said, Lord, I can use this to help the poor, or help your servants, or, help your work to go further. I'd buy some Bibles for poor people and maybe give books to those who couldn't afford to buy them, etc. And do good to people with that. So that's a good thing to do. I mean, if God's given you more than enough for your needs, it's good to share some of it with others. But then there's also a matter of righteousness. For example, if you go to a church regularly and use its facilities, there's a lot of expenses a church has for lighting and taxes and so many other things. If you use the facility, it's like asking, would you pay rent for a house you live in? Well, if you go to a church facility, you should be upright and share in the expenses of that church. That's righteous. It's totally unrighteous of a Christian to go and stay in a hotel and not pay his bill, and totally unrighteous to take advantage of the facilities in a church and not pay for all the expenses there. And if there are servants of the Lord there who are supported by the church, and you feel that the ministry in the church is edifying, I don't believe in supporting any odd ministry, but if you find the ministry in the church is edifying and building you up, then you have to look at it as a doctor who's treated you and healed you of some sickness. Would you pay such a doctor? I find Christians are very upright in paying doctors who treat them for their body and don't care much about people who have done something far more important for their soul. So the Bible says that the laborer is worthy of his hire. So there's nothing wrong in supporting a person who is, if a person is supporting himself, that's another thing. But if he's blessed you, there's nothing wrong. Paul says there's nothing wrong in supporting such a person. But you have to be careful also, you have to be wise. I think a lot of giving is very unwise. It's no use supporting a church which has already got plenty of money. You'd better give it to some poor church. And certainly not to all these television evangelists who are fleecing money from people to live in a grand lifestyle themselves. So be secret in your giving, be cheerful in your giving, and be wise and faithful in giving. And then the question of percentage is totally unimportant. Give according to your need. You may find something very interesting if you go to our CFC website. Our website is called cfcindia.com. Everything there is free, all the messages, sermons, books. But there we have one column on finances where we tell people how to give. And saying if you're not born again, you can't give to God. If you've got a grudge against somebody that's not settled, you can't give to God. If you're in debt, I don't mean a mortgage. A mortgage is not a debt because you got a house to replace the money taken, but any other debt that you have, you should clear that first, etc. Sometime when you get time, you can read that. How do you view